Good evening and welcome. You're with the News First, your number one news provider. I'm Shamir Rasooli.
A very good evening. I'm Mahina Bongzo. We start off with a look at your headlines.
The President says that Sri Lanka's ability to stand strong in the face of the global economic crisis should be attributed to the country's planned economic policies. Ceylon Petroleum Corporation to appeal against a judgment made by a London court on the hedging agreement. The Minister of Petroleum Industry states that the present situation would not have arisen if the Supreme Court decision was implemented. Minister Champika Ranawaka says that the supply of electricity was disrupted from time to protect the national grid.
President Mahinda Rajapaksa stated that Sri Lanka's ability to stand strong in the face of the global economic crisis should be attributed to the country's planned economic policies. The head of state made this statement at a function held at Temple Trees today.
This function was held to present appointment letters to 227 management trainees who were selected by the People's Bank. The President, who congratulated the management trainees, requested them to come forward willingly in order to provide what the country expects from them.
It is owing to proper planning that we managed to win a war that could not be won for 30 years. Because we worked systematically to develop our economy, we were able to operate our economy without letting it collapse. We did this at a time when the entire global economy collapsed, when a food crisis was looming ahead owing to a food shortage, when the dollar collapsed, when prices increased, and when there was a fuel crisis.
Meanwhile, 70 million rupees from the Employees Trust Fund was presented for the education of students who passed last year's Grade 5 scholarship examination.
Reports have emerged of a possible economic meltdown in Europe. News First will continue to monitor the developments and keep you updated on the key events. A special segment on Primetime News will provide all the information you need on this developing story on a later date.
Minister of Power and Energy Patali Champika Ranawaka states that intermittent power cuts were implemented during the past few days in a bid to secure the national grid. The minister, who made this statement at a media briefing held today, also stated that since this was a temporary situation, they could not inform the public about it.
The Minister of Power and Energy stated that there has been a reduction in the rainfall experienced in catchment areas near hydropower plants when taking into account the average rainfall experienced over the past 30 years. The ministry noted that by the end of June, the hydropower storage in the reservoirs had reduced to 350 gigawatt hours. We have to focus completely on thermal power. Both the Yugudana power plant in Keravalapitia and the Lakvijay coal power plant, which is a new power plant, can supply nearly 40% of our daily energy needs. Now, if these two power plants malfunction, then it will come to a point where energy cannot be supplied to the electricity grid. Unfortunately, there were problems in the equipment. Therefore, we had to save the system from time to time, and power had to be disconnected in those energy systems. There was no way to inform about this because this is not a long-term problem. Views were also expressed about the coal power plant. A coal power plant is a very complex power plant. There are lots of systems in it. We have not taken the coal power project to our hands. This is still in the hands of a Chinese contractor. We had to shut down the plant because a line had malfunctioned on the 7th of July. But today I state with responsibility that this plant can be activated without any problem in the future. It was also stated at the media briefing that steps will be taken to supply electricity uninterrupted irrespective of the hydropower situation. The Ceylon Petroleum Corporation states that the court has granted permission to file an appeal against the order made by a commercial court in London in connection with the hedging agreement reached with Standard Chartered Bank. A court in London yesterday found that Sri Lanka's Ceylon Petroleum Corporation owes nearly $162 million plus interest to Standard Chartered Bank for non-payment of dues linked to hedging.
According to the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, the court proceedings in this regard will be handled by the Attorney General's Department. Sean Gamble, Senior Manager External Communications Group Corporate Affairs of Standard Chartered Bank, responding to queries made by News First via email, said that the bank is happy to get a favourable judgment and expects the client to respect this judgment.
For Mr. Susil Premajanta, because he came in after the debacle had happened, but it is his responsibility now as a minister in charge to take action against the people who misled the previous minister in entering into this agreement. Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a trend now in this country. The IGP had to resign after the death of Mr. Roshan Shanaka. The secretary to the Petroleum Ministry had to resign due to the low quality petrol that was imported. I think it is high time that the Governor Central Bank also resign on account of losing such a colossal amount of money of the taxpayers of Sri Lanka. Somebody has to take responsibility. Now the Governor Central Bank is chairing some committee to bring the Commonwealth Games to Sri Lanka at the cost of the first estimate, which will be more than 65% of the total revenue of the state. So if that goes wrong, who will be responsible? You know, no one knows who is responsible. Here there is a clear case of responsibility lying with certain people. There is clear evidence, documentary evidence, who pushed these transactions.
Did any officials take responsibility for this? No one took any responsibility. The Sri Lankan government had to take responsibility. Our treasury will have to pay this. The responsibility of putting money in the treasury rests on the innocent public. Those who used petrol and those who don't, all of them have been made liable to pay for this.
It was in 2007 that a price insurance, also known as hedging, was introduced to Sri Lanka when purchasing crude oil. The aim of this agreement was to maintain a standard fuel price in Sri Lanka when the world crude oil prices were fluctuating. Accordingly, a stock of oil was imported to Sri Lanka in March 2007 for the first time under this agreement. Subsequently, the government entered into more hedging agreements with several other commercial banks in a backdrop where the world crude oil prices were at a record high level. However, with the decrease of world crude oil prices, unexpectedly, Sri Lanka was faced with a very unfavorable situation as per the conditions of the hedging agreement. In this backdrop, several representatives of the opposition sought legal action in 2008 against this agreement. Accordingly, in December 2008, the Supreme Court issued an interim order that an investigation needs to be carried out on the hedging agreement. In December 2008, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka issued orders suspending payments to the commercial banks as per the agreement. However, the Supreme Court dismissed the opposition petition in January 2009.
2 years ago, we went to court on behalf of the people to ensure to say that this hedging deal is something which is absolutely illegal and which is uneconomical for the country. Today it has been proven correct. That day we were trying to be character assassinated, saying, why are we doing this? And if it was done then, today we don't need to pay the $162 million US dollars plus the interest, which will roughly come to about $240,000 million.
Court, having considered all the submissions, made two orders. One was we stopped payment to the banks. The other was we directed that the price of petrol, which was 125 rupees a litre if I am not mistaken, be brought down to 100 rupees. Indian Oil Company was also given the same order. Indian Oil Company complied. Sri Lanka Petroleum Corporation didn't comply, and we were informed that the Cabinet of Ministers had taken a specific decision not to honour the Supreme Court order. Everybody realized that the court was in a very difficult position because the government has decided, probably for the first time in Sri Lanka, that the Supreme Court order should be disregarded and contradicted. So at that stage, the petitioners said, we didn't file these cases to bring about a conflict between the government and the court, and we are withdrawing our cases.
Even at the COPE discussions in Parliament, of course, I also raised some questions about that at that time, the hedging deal, of course. Now, the hedging, there are so many instruments. So they have selected one instrument. I don't know how they entered into this agreement and all that, right? But what I can say is there are some court cases also. Even the Supreme Court intervened. There are some petitions. The Supreme Court's against this hedging deal and all that. Then the Supreme Court issued an order, and then of course saying that agreement is null and void in the first instance, and then of course that is withdrawn due to so many reasons. But my position is, if that the order of the Supreme Court saying that this is null and void, the agreement, I think if they stand for that judgment, of course, I think we'd have in a better position.
Now, this is an order that is operative internationally. Arbitration orders would be operative internationally. So, it is not possible, in my conception, to defy these orders. If we defy an order against us for payment made by a court having jurisdiction, then that becomes a debt on our part, a debt in default. The normal consequence of a debt of a government being in default is that all the other loans taken by the government also turns out to be in default and are payable. That will lead us to a state of bankruptcy.
Our attempts to contact Central Bank Governor Ajit Niwad Kabral to get a reaction from him on the hedging agreement and the judgment made by a commercial court in London proved futile. Now you can watch the full interview with Minister of Petroleum Industries Susil Premajayantha on BizFirst in Focus on Friday at 9:30 p.m. on Channel 1 MTV.